us expressing to central administration to go through the budget with fine-tooth comb and adjust it as necessary prior to the May 7th presentation to the community of the tentative, of the projected budget, as well as the vote that will take place that night in terms of the adoption of the final budget.
I'm going to have to disagree real quickly. I never saw this 1.9 given to the board. From what was presented to us through email about that, it was always 1.3. So I know that you said that 600,000 was cut from finance to when it was given to us.
No,
I was never.
My initial discussions with administration, that was the number that I was hearing, and that number has been reduced substantially to the point when it was presented to the Finance Committee, and that since Finance, I believe there has been additional cuts in terms of what we are being asked to, in fact, adopt tonight as the Mr. Miller, I'm sorry, Mr. Benoit.
I'm just saying I never saw those cuts.
The rest
that you were mentioning, because you said that we were provided with those cuts. I did not see those cuts. Maybe Finance Committee had a higher number then that was given to the full board in our package, but I was told when I went and met with administration that there was a $600,000 cut, but I never seen that starting number of 1.9 to get us down to 1.3.
Mr. Benoit, if you wish to please address the rest of
There's been a lot of numbers just tossed out willy-nilly, in my opinion, because we're not talking about facts in a sequential way. So suffice it to say that the spirit and the presentation that Mr. Sanasak did at my request at the finance meeting, and it was the first time that we saw the numbers too. That's the whole point of having a finance subcommittee, is to review when you see the numbers, the best that you have, and you are faced with a 2-day delivery notice to the county. The county needed to have a tentative budget, and there's concern, evidently traditional concern, that you can at least reduce a submission to the county, but you'll have a hard time trying to make any increase after the fact. From my perspective, I wanted Mr. Sanasak, and I asked for it, and we must have said it at least, and I am not exaggerating, 3 times in the meeting itself, that this was a worst-case scenario in order to satisfy what I perceive to be a bureaucratic loophole in the requirements of county state finance planning. The problem is that the legislature was judicious enough to change the public due date of a budget from a Board of Education to May 7th this year for the first time as a result of the change in our schedules, in our voting schedules for voting for board members. So they wanted to be able to give new board members, starting in January, sufficient time to participate in the budget process. Unfortunately, the legislature, and this sometimes happens, probably you think happens a lot, they didn't think about the counties, so they left the dates alone, the same. But we still have the problem of not getting accurate data from the state, from federal, and from other things, grants that we're working on, grant monies. So what do? You do a best guess that you can in a short period of time, based on things that look pretty solid, and you satisfy the county because you don't want to look back. But our whole planning cycle is to interview on a weekly basis. And if you saw our schedule here, we're going to be spending many hours between now and May 7th in producing the budget that we're proud to produce and show you what we're doing and what we've planned for. For the sake of the finance members, because we couldn't go into all the detail of all the numbers at the time, I asked Mr. Sanasak to make 3 categories, to write down 3 categories. One of them was federal issues, one of them was state issues, and one of them is local district issues. And we discussed them for a half an hour prior to coming up with this tentative budget, hoping that people would realize. Well, it turned out that, 5 of the 6 members voted in favor of sending it to the county because they finally understood the spirit that we were trying to utilize in satisfying what I perceive to be a bureaucratic requirement. And we were pleased with that. Since then, just in the last few days, Mr. Sanasak was able to fine-tune to a greater degree some specific numbers. But if you were to see, and you will see, all of the budget, all of the district goals, all of the strategic planning objectives that this board, that every member of this board, this last year participated in and said, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do this. When you count all of that up, that amounted to spending 2%. And yet we still had the issues of a list of unfunded mandates. And what are we going to do about that? And perhaps more federal expenditures than we didn't anticipate. And there's some goals that we have that we've agreed to, all of us, universally said, that's a great idea. It's not up to the finance subcommittee to say to this board or be arrogant to this board. It would be arrogant if we did this, to say, we don't think you really need that in the curriculum. I disagree with some of the safety costs that we've expended in order to have a safer environment for our kids. Who are we to say that? We're not allowed to say that. I think we're not allowed morally to say that. What we have to do is when we get input from all of the board members, as we have, and it's been unanimous, I can go through these item by item, and I plan to. In the May budget submission, you will get a list of this, and you'll really see the detailed analysis. I had one finance member say to me, we shouldn't go into the details of the budget. We should micromanage it. A good overview is good enough. Well, it isn't good enough. And we plan to produce the input that you can see the details of what's involved and what this whole board, everybody, not just 1 or 2 that held back, but everybody participated in. And it's good for you to know that everyone participated in it. So, and we had a significant contract. We were delighted to have a significant contract. But, as much as you say there's savings in one area and all, it's still a 2.75%, increase. We're happy. We're happy that we have an agreement and we're moving ahead, but we better fund that properly. And we better not close our eyes to the needs of curriculum and the needs of safety. And I can go on. And facilities, we haven't even talked about the needs in facilities for new roof or new this or new that. We want to review that with you. We don't want to see gross misinformation by somebody that might be, who knows what the agenda is. I don't even want to go into what other agendas could be. But you will get that information. And we did fulfill our legal obligation in submitting a tentative budget. And we must have said it 100 times. So that's the best way I can answer it.
Mr. Miller also asked in terms, or raised a question in terms of the number of items that were on the agenda for the Finance Committee.
Well, I have
Mr.
the,
Chair?
At this point, Mr. Benoit is responding to Mr. Miller.
I thought this was a board discussion, so
I understand, but questions were directly asked of him, and in terms of point of order, the chair rules that Mr. Benoit needs to first address these questions, and then we will continue the discussion.
this is what was on the agenda that was handed out that evening. Welcome, and that's where I gave some background, and this, Barbara, is something that you might not be aware of, but we also, and someone else asked about 3 years ago, about talking about perhaps a tax initiative and getting people involved. We have been working on that. We have worked with, or attempted to work with Republican legislators and Democrat legislators.
Mr. Benoit, can you just address the agenda directly?
It was one of the items that that was part of the welcome, to let people know that we're still working on it, because it does affect the budget, we think, in the future. The second thing was voice over IP, a new phone system presentation. The third agenda item was to review the transfers and ask, are there any questions on the transfers, any objections? The fourth was to talk about the School Development Authority, the capital projects that Mr. Sanasak has been working on, and how much we'll get from the ROD grants. The fourth, we're just defining the parameters of how we will evaluate those things. The fifth was the tentative budget. The sixth was the committee goals. I had submitted committee goals. And the last was to review the minutes and permit any other discussion items. That was the agenda.
Mr. Benoit, can you
Excuse
tell me
Mr.
where
Miller.
that,
Excuse me, Mr. Miller. I would just
responding
like,
back to him, because
I'd just
I don't know
like
where that
to
agenda
provide
is.
another piece of information to the public. Would you just also inform, the question was raised in terms of whether this Finance Committee is operating only on a year-to-year basis. And then
I
I will
did not
turn it
answer
back
that
to you.
question.
I'm sorry?
You said he was responding to my question.
Correct.
That is not a question that I've asked. Well, now I want to go back to my question. I took the actual agenda that was posted on the district website on March 12th by our Assistant Superintendent for Business Administration, Board Secretary. The agenda items are listed as number 1, committee goals, number 2, update, doesn't say what, number 3, any other items may arise. There is no, I don't know what agenda you're reciting from, but that agenda was not provided to the public, and that's my problem is that information should have been placed on this agenda so the public would have known the tentative budget was going to be discussed as well as the board members. That wasn't even the agenda that was emailed to us. So I would like to know that agenda that he's reading from, where did that agenda come from? Is that something provided that evening or something in advance?
This was an agenda for the public and distributed to the public on the night of the meeting for anyone who wanted to review it.
Mr. Benoit, the problem is if it's provided at the meeting, the night of the meeting, the public cannot see it. The public has to go by what's posted on the district website. They cannot see what is handed out at a meeting and then make a determination if they're going to come to that meeting.
Mr. Benoit, please. I'm going to turn to Mr. O'Brien. You also wanted to participate in this discussion.
Thank you, sir. First of all, it's going to be probably a long discussion. I hope we all have patience with each other as we express our points of view and allow each person to really have the ability not just to make a statement, but then in further discussion to clarify, work together to come to some form of consensus on this very, very tough issue.
Mr. O'Brien, can you move your microphone just a little closer? I'm
Sure.
having a little difficulty.
I can't hear him either.
Well, I don't usually get accused of being too quiet, but I'll work with you. What I'd like to do before coming to the meeting tonight, I composed a memo to the board, which I'd like to read into the record and have as part of our discussion. And it's not my best work, but I have to tell you, it's something I've been thinking about, and it's very important. I'd like to have the board's input on it. Let me start off by saying, fellow board members, on March 21st, 2013, the Howell Township Board of Education voted to approve the following base budget. And at the time, the general fund local tax levy was $65 $65,287,732. With the other figures in total, it was $70,998,422. That included debt service of $5,710,000. And this particular tentative budget has a general tax levy of $69,117,083. So what we're looking at is a change in the overall levy, even with an increase to $74,703,530. The actual local tax levy goes from $65,287,000 and change to $69,117,000. Now, the increase in the local tax levy under the tentative base budget will be $3,829,351. The budget asks for an additional $1,256,421 above the cap to implement mandates. In addition, the increase includes an additional $583,931 under the health benefits waiver to pay for increased costs of health benefits. I'd like to note that last year it was $770,000 was the actual increase. I would respectfully request that we do not exceed the cap at this time and instead approve a tentative base budget with a local tax levy of $67,866,662. This would still be an increase of $2,572,930 from last year and would allow the district to address some of the challenges we face in providing a quality education for our children. However, it would keep this district within the cap under current law and would preserve some of the savings this board has been able to achieve in past budget cycles. It is important to remember that this community cannot sustain significant and permanent increases in the local tax levy. We are already at a local school tax rate of 1.277 versus the average local school tax rate of 0.84. If you want, and for the public, there's an attached spreadsheet that shows that I provided for the board that shows the difference between our levies, our tax rates, and the fact that we're paying one of the highest percentages per our assessed value of any school district, equivalent to ours with more than 750 school kids in their district. So I believe that we must ask this administration to implement a policy where they develop budgets that do not exceed the cap as defined by law and slow the rate of growth in the local tax levy as a key long-term fiscal goal. Where possible, in future budget cycles, we must try to stay significantly under the cap or flat in order to try to bring our district back in line with what is affordable for our community. For too many years in the past, we grew the local tax levy at over 8 to 10% a year. 8 to 10%. This has left us with a very, very high local tax levy and a local school tax rate that is significantly higher than other districts. We cannot change the past, but we can make decisions now, choices now that have a tremendous impact for our children and our community in the future. Remember, every increase we make in the local tax levy is going to compound again in each successive year. The cumulative effect of such increases over 5 to 10 years would be devastating to our community. We must strike a balance and respect the limits of what our community can sustain while providing a quality education for our children. I want to thank all of you for considering this, and I'm really looking forward to a very thoughtful discussion of this key issue. Thank you.
Is there any other member of the board who wishes to participate in this discussion? Mrs. Brandon.
Thank you. I appreciated listening to the
Mrs. Brandon, if you would again bring the microphone closer to you.
I apologize. I certainly appreciated listening to the members of our community who spoke up tonight. I think it's really important that we hear from the people that we're serving. Their parents, their taxpayers, and I really do appreciate and want to thank you guys for taking the time to come out and speak your mind. I too share in the need for empathy for the taxpayers. I am concerned about the drop in enrollment that we have experienced, and our future indicators do show that we will continue to drop, and that is a concern. It has always been in my mind as well that as our numbers drop, what are the correlating drops in our budget? Mr. Van Noy had said something before regarding satisfying the county because we didn't want to look bad. And I think that was in terms, if I'm not mistaken, about going high and then we can whittle it down. But I personally would disagree, because I'm not here to satisfy the county. I'm here to satisfy our parents, our children, our taxpayers, our community. And I think that it would be far more prudent for us, and I've always had this belief, it's far more prudent to start with what are our absolute positive necessities. We can always build out. It's easier to add than it is to subtract. And when we start high, I think it gives a perception that, okay, well, yeah, we'll start high, and maybe we can whittle it down a little, and maybe that will satisfy our community. But I think, my opinion, is that I feel more comfortable when you say, okay, this is our bare bones, this is what we need to do. But if there are other factors that come into play, such as numbers that we haven't gotten in from the state or from the federal governments, different things that can come into play, and I think it's more genuine to say, we hoped these numbers were going to come in, but they didn't, and we are facing a deficit here, so we're going to need to tweak the numbers this way and that way, and then come out with it. If we have to tweak it higher, I think that that's more understandable, and I think that, in my opinion, it's more sincere to say, listen, we really did try to attack this. We kept this down as low as we can, but now we see that we're going to have to make accommodations for numbers that have now come in after the fact. So I'm concerned about that. And I have great concern about going into that cap bank. We have done the administration and the board have worked together for years now, very diligently, and I've been very proud to be a part of this board, and to be a part of the team that has made it so that we have kept a line on these taxes and on the budget. And I think that we've proven ourselves to be successful on that. And I don't want to see our success be erased so quickly and so dramatically. That it just seems that it's, again, disingenuous to say, we're going to hold the line, and then all of a sudden, 1 year, pop, there it goes. And I just don't think that that is fair to our community. I don't think it's fair to our taxpayers. I do understand what you're saying when we have, as a board, said we like this idea, well, let's implement that, let's buy this, let's support that. And that does all cost money. And I fully am aware. But when you have a budget, if you were going to make these things priorities, then other things have to become less of a priority and perhaps fall off the budget. When it comes to items that are coming to the budget from strategic planning, the strategic planning is a five-year statement. It's not something that all has to be done here and now. None of it has to be done here and now. Not that I'm saying none of it should be done here and now, but I think it has to be put into the whole big picture. We can't, there's a lot that has to go into this, but I think the bottom line is to be fair to our community. To go beyond the cap, I think, would be unfair. I would have a very difficult time embracing the concept of going into that cap bank at this time, or any time in the future, because our taxes are out of line with our neighboring communities, and we all feel it. Thank you.
Other members of the board, please. Mr. Giovanni. Mr. O'Brien.
I'll defer to any other
People
board member that hasn't
first
had a
choice.
chance to speak.
We'll come back in a second.
Absolutely.
One of the things I've always enjoyed most about these discussions is that reasonable people can look at things in different ways and have really good discussions on them. There are so many things that every member has said that strikes to the heart in terms of the tax situation, the burdens we have, the comments from the public in terms of how do I continue to live with this situation. But there's some key things I think that we need to, and they're brief, but there's some key things I think we need to remember when we talk about this particular tentative budget. And that's the key word here, is that, and this is just a disagreement in terms of what's easier. It almost goes back to the